The hum of the office was a familiar lullaby. Not the kind that soothes, but the kind that grinds. It was the sound of 1,000 tiny frustrations echoing through fluorescent-lit halls, the symphony of mediocrity conducted by a committee of out-of-touch executives. And I was usually the quiet stagehand, making sure the lights didn't flicker and the backdrops didn't fall. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and for 12 years, I'd been the unseen architect of the data that ran this place. I wasn't the one charming investors or high-fiving at the water cooler. I was the one who made sure the water cooler actually had water, metaphorically speaking. I was the one who wrangled rogue spreadsheets, unearthed forgotten trends, and turned mountains of raw numbers into the crystal-clear insights that kept this whole circus from collapsing into a heap of bad decisions and even worse, coffee. My domain was the third floor, a beige purgatory of cubicles where the air conditioning always seemed to be fighting a losing battle with the collective body heat of stressed-out analysts. My desk was a testament to organized chaos. A dual-monitor setup that could track every project simultaneously. A meticulously organized stack of research papers. And a surprisingly robust collection of artisanal teas. Most importantly, it was where the digital keys to the kingdom resided, access to databases, analytics platforms, and the encrypted repositories of what this company actually knew about itself. The CEO, a man named Bartholomew Vance, was a legend in his own mind. He had a penchant for buzzwords, a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a tailor who clearly charged by the square inch of expensive fabric. He saw himself as a visionary, a titan of industry steering us through choppy waters with his unwavering confidence and his perfectly knotted Windsor tie. The reality was, he was more of a captain who shouted orders from the bridge while the actual engineers were below deck, covered in grease, keeping the engines from exploding. And I, Sarah Jenkins, was one of those engineers. The air today felt particularly thick with impending doom, the kind you get before a company-wide announcement that always sounds like good news, but usually translates to, we're cutting corners and someone's job is on the line. The whispers had been circulating for weeks. Rumors of a strategic realignment, a synergy initiative, and the usual corporate jargon designed to sound progressive while masking deep-seated anxiety. Then came the email. A calendar invite for a quarterly performance review and strategic outlook meeting. Subject: Key Stakeholder Session. Urgent. The attendees list read like a who's who of the executive suite. Vance himself, his perpetually tanned head of marketing, Brenda Sterling, whose primary contribution seemed to be generating aesthetically pleasing but ultimately meaningless social media campaigns, David Chen, the chief financial officer, who spoke in numbers that always seemed to be either falling or inexplicably rising, and a few other suits whose titles were as interchangeable as their beige power suits. My name was not on the list. Not even as a secondary attendee. Not even as a requested viewer. Nothing. It was a deliberate omission, a calculated snub that felt like a cold, wet dish rag slapped across my face. I, the one who compiled the Q2 sales projections that Vance had proudly presented as his own genius foresight. The one who'd flagged the potential Q3 supply chain bottleneck that saved us millions. The one who painstakingly built the very dashboards they used to pretend they understood the business. I was excluded. It wasn't the first time my contributions had been sidelined, my expertise treated as a background hum rather than the engine it was. But this was different. This was a clear message. I was no longer deemed a key stakeholder. My role, crucial as it was deemed unglamorous, perhaps even expendable. I stared at the empty space on my calendar where the meeting should have been. It was like looking into a void. A void that screamed, "You are not important enough." The silence in my cubicle, usually a sanctuary, suddenly felt oppressive, suffocating. The keyboards clacked around me, oblivious. Brenda Sterling was probably prepping her latest synergy number innovation hashtag. Chen was likely polishing his EBITDA figures. And Vance? He was probably rehearsing his keynote speech, filled with more empty promises than a politician on election day. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the sudden clench of anxiety in my chest. Anger would come later. Right now, it was about assessment. This wasn't about hurt feelings, it was about professional protocol. Exclusion from a meeting concerning strategic outlook for a quarter I was directly responsible for analyzing was more than just rude, it was fundamentally unprofessional. It was a breach of the unwritten rules of how a functioning business operates. I leaned back in my chair, the worn fabric sighing under my weight. 12 years. 12 years of late nights, of deciphering cryptic data points, of building systems that were so seamless, so integrated, that people forgot they were there. I was the digital equivalent of the foundation of a skyscraper. Nobody noticed it until the whole damn thing started to lean. My gaze drifted to a small, almost forgotten sticky note on the corner of my monitor. It was a relic from a particularly frustrating internal audit years ago, a reminder of a specific compliance clause I'd unearthed and championed. It read, "Reminder, all critical strategic proposals require documented data analysis sign-off from data integrity-led. Protocol 7B. Do not bypass. Protocol 7B." A clause so obscure, so buried in the corporate labyrinth, that most people probably assumed it was a suggestion, but I knew better. I'd spent days fighting to get it implemented, to ensure that decisions weren't made on a whim or a gut feeling, but on solid, verifiable data. And I was the designated data integrity lead, a title that sounded rather grand for someone whose main task was ensuring the numbers didn't lie. I opened my internal calendar, the one that Vance and his ilk never saw. I navigated to the date and time of the key stakeholder session. The empty slot stared back at me. Then, with a deliberate slowness, I clicked on it. A small dialog box appeared. New event, I typed. Follow-up memo, strategic outlook meeting, data analysis and compliance review. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The actual meeting had already happened. The decisions, whatever they were, had been made. But the crucial step, the one that ensured those decisions were data-backed and compliant, hadn't. And according to Protocol 7B, it needed to happen. I saved the event. It was a placeholder, a digital breadcrumb, a quiet statement that the process, for me, was not yet complete. I then opened a new document, titled it, Strategic Outlook Meeting, Post-Session Analysis, Draft. I began typing, not with anger, but with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. I documented the meeting that had occurred without me. I noted the topics that were likely discussed based on the pre-meeting agenda I'd received as a general employee, not as a key stakeholder. I cross-referenced these with the current operational data, the sales figures, the market trends I had been monitoring. I began to construct the actual data analysis, the one that was supposed to have happened before any decisions were finalized. The irony was almost too rich. They excluded me from the meeting, assuming I was just a functionary, a cog in the machine. They didn't realize that the cog was intricately connected to the engine, and without its proper function, the whole mechanism would eventually seize. Protocol 7B wasn't just about data, it was about accountability. And accountability, Vance and his ilk seemed to have forgotten, was a two-way street. I wasn't fired, not yet. Not in the traditional sense. I was simply sidestepped, left on the periphery. But in the world of corporate justice, sometimes being left on the outside looking in is the most powerful position to be in, because from there, you can see the cracks, you can see the flaws in the foundation, and you can meticulously plan your next move, not with emotion, but with cold, hard logic. The clock on my screen ticked past 5 p.m. The office began to empty, the sounds of hurried goodbyes and the rumble of elevators filling the void. Most people were eager to escape the fluorescent hum. I, on the other hand, was just getting started. I closed the document, saved it, and then did something that felt both profound and utterly normal. I packed my bag. Not with the urgency of someone fleeing, but with the calm deliberation of someone who knew they would be back. Or, perhaps more accurately, that the consequences of their departure would follow them. As I walked out of the building, the evening air felt surprisingly crisp. It was the kind of air that felt clean, unburdened by the recycled anxiety of office politics. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't feel a pang of sadness for the years I'd poured into this place. Instead, I felt a quiet, steely resolve. They had made their mistake. They had underestimated the power of the quiet analyst in the beige cubicle, the keeper of the inconvenient truths. And soon, very soon, Bartholomew Vance and his gaggle of buzzword-slinging executives were going to realize that forgetting to include someone in a meeting was a lot like forgetting to check if the brakes on your car were working. It's a small oversight with potentially catastrophic consequences. And I, Sarah Jenkins, the now uninvited data integrity lead, had just put the keys to the ignition in my pocket. This wasn't the end. It was the preamble. The slow, deliberate winding up of a very precise, very corporate clock. Let the games begin. The next morning, the office hummed with its usual insincere optimism. Vance, no doubt, was strutting through the halls, high-fiving himself for his strategic brilliance. Brenda Sterling was probably already crafting Instagram captions about the new dawn of the company, while David Chen was probably buried under spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the cost of Vance's ego with the company's bottom line. They were operating under the illusion that the critical decisions had been made, that the future was secure, all thanks to their insightful data-driven meeting. Little did they know, the data itself was about to stage a rebellion. For me, Sarah Jenkins, the day began not with the frantic rush of an office worker, but with the calm, methodical preparation of a chess grandmaster. My home office, a stark contrast to the beige purgatory I'd left behind, was my command center. The aroma of freshly brewed Earl Grey, a stark improvement on the instant sludge at the office, filled the air. My dual monitors glowed, not with corporate dashboards, but with meticulously organized digital folders. This wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. About ensuring that the process, the one Vance and his cronies had so gleefully bypassed, was enforced. I'd spent the evening meticulously documenting everything. Every email I'd sent regarding Q3 projections, every data anomaly report flagged, every warning I'd issued about potential supply chain disruptions, all carefully timestamped and cross-referenced. I had copies of my analyses, my risk assessments, my recommendations. These weren't just files on a hard drive, they were the ammunition. The digital equivalent of a tactical strike plan, ready to be deployed with surgical precision. And then there was Protocol 7B, that obscure, almost mythical clause I'd fought so hard to implement. I pulled up the original documentation, the internal memo that had codified it. All critical strategic proposals required documented data analysis sign-off from Data Integrity Lead. Protocol 7. B. Do not bypass. I'd even created a small, almost unnoticeable watermark on the digital copy of the meeting minutes from last year's quarterly review, a subtle, almost imperceptible data analysis pending sign-off stamp that only became visible under certain light conditions. A digital fingerprint, a whisper of oversight. The first domino fell, not with a bang, but with a polite yet firm email. It was sent to Vance, Brenda, David, and the rest of the executive attendees. Subject: Follow-up. Regarding Q4 Strategic Outlook Meeting, Protocol 7, B, Compliance. Dear team, it began, my tone as neutral and professional as a seasoned diplomat. Further to the Strategic Outlook meeting held yesterday, I am completing the required data analysis and compliance review as mandated by Protocol 7B. My findings indicate several critical strategic proposals discussed may benefit from further data validation before final implementation. Specifically, concerning the projected market penetration strategy for the new product line and the proposed allocation of resources for the XYZ initiative, my analysis suggests potential risks that were not fully addressed due to the absence of comprehensive data review prior to decision-making. I attached my painstakingly compiled report. It wasn't accusatory, it was factual. It laid out the data, the projected outcomes based on my analysis, and highlighted the discrepancies between their assumed success and the statistical probabilities. I quoted the relevant sections of their own financial projections and juxtaposed them with my more conservative, data-backed forecasts. I have also noted that my role as data integrity-led, as defined by company policy, was not represented in the meeting to provide direct analytical input. While I understand the need for streamlined decision-making, Protocol 7B is in place to ensure that critical strategic shifts are grounded in robust data. I am available to discuss these findings at your earliest convenience to ensure full compliance and mitigate any potential risks. I hit send. It was a gentle nudge, a polite reminder of the rules they'd so carelessly ignored. I knew it wouldn't be met with immediate understanding, but rather with annoyance, perhaps even dismissal. But that was part of the plan. The first domino had fallen. By mid-morning, the trickle of confusion began. An internal email chain, originally meant for damage control, started circulating among department heads. It was hushed, guarded, but the panic was palpable. Brenda Sterling, clearly blindsided, was furiously forwarding my report to her team with subject lines like, "What is this?" and "Urgent, clarification needed on Q4 projections." Then came a text message from Mark, a mid-level manager in sales, someone I'd worked closely with on several analytical projects. "Sarah, what the fuck is going on? Vance is losing it. Brenda's team is in meltdown. They're saying the Q4 numbers you sent out are tanking the projections. He's calling them anomalies and saying your report is disrupting the synergy. What did you do?" I smiled faintly. Anomalies was a funny choice of words, considering my job was to identify them. And disrupting synergy? I was simply presenting the truth, the raw data that their carefully constructed narrative couldn't withstand. The second domino fell later that afternoon. A client, Global Innovations Incorporated, a major player in our industry and a cornerstone of our Q4 revenue targets, sent a terse email to Vance's office. The subject read, "Urgent inquiry, discrepancies in projected rollout schedule." Apparently, our projected delivery date for a crucial component, one that was central to their own strategic planning, was now in question based on some internal re-evaluation of supply chain logistics. They'd seen the whispers, the internal panic, and they were calling us out. This wasn't just a minor hiccup. Global Innovations Incorporated was a significant client. Their dissatisfaction could have ripple effects. Suddenly, Vance's carefully curated image of a company on the rise, a company with unwavering strategic vision, was starting to fray at the edges. I received a frantic, slightly slurred voicemail from Mark around 6 p.m. "Sarah, you gotta call me, it's bad. Global Innovations is threatening to pull out. They heard about the supply chain thing. Vance is blaming someone in logistics, but I heard Chen is having a meltdown about cash flow because the Q4 revenue is now looking, not so great. This is all because of your report, isn't it? What's going on?" I didn't call him back immediately. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then, I typed a short professional reply to his voicemail. "Mark, my report was based on factual data analysis. Protocol 7B requires thorough review before strategic implementation. I recommend everyone familiarize themselves with company compliance procedures. My role is to ensure accuracy, not to disrupt synergy." The true trap, however, wasn't just the disruption. It was the inevitable cascade that Protocol 7B guaranteed. The clause wasn't just about data sign-off, it also had a subclause I'd managed to get buried deep within the implementation guidelines. Any strategic decision made without adherence to Protocol 7B shall be subject to immediate review and potential nullification by the Data Integrity Lead, pending recompliance and audit. Nullification. A nice sterile corporate term for undo. I waited. The emails from Vance's office became more frequent, more desperate. They were a chaotic mix of damage control and thinly veiled accusations. Brenda was sending out frantic team-wide messages about maintaining brand integrity and positive communication, clearly trying to spin the narrative. Chen was sending out revised financial models that looked more like speculative fiction than actual projections. Then came the email that truly signaled the trap was sprung. It was from Vance's executive assistant, a woman named Carol, who usually communicated with the gravitas of a papal envoy. Subject: Urgent. Request for clarification and proposed remediation plan. Dear Miss Jenkins, Mr. Vance has requested an immediate meeting to discuss your recent data analysis and its implications on the Q4 strategic outlook. He requires a detailed explanation of your findings and a proposed plan to rectify the discrepancies identified in your report. Please be prepared to present your analysis and recommendations in a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in Conference Room A. Attendance is mandatory for all members of the executive leadership team. I read it twice. Mandatory for all. The word rectify was particularly telling. They weren't just asking for my analysis. They were admitting they needed to fix something. And that something was their own impulsive, dataless decision-making. The kicker? Protocol 7B also stated that any proposed remedial action, especially one involving strategic nullification, required formal sign-off from the data integrity lead. In essence, they couldn't even fix their mistake without my formal approval. I was no longer just the analyst, I was the gatekeeper. I drafted my reply to Carol, keeping it brief and professional. Subject: urgent. Request for clarification and proposed remediation plan. Dear Carol, thank you for the meeting invitation. I will be present tomorrow at 9 a.m. in Conference Room A. Please confirm that all executive leadership team members, including Mr. Vance, Mr. Chen, and Ms. Sterling, will be in attendance. Additionally, as per Protocol 7B, any proposed remediation plan that involves the nullification or significant revision of previously made strategic decisions will require my formal sign-off. I will come prepared to discuss the necessary compliance steps. Regards, Sarah Jenkins. Data Integrity Lead. I hit send. The tone was polite, almost deferential, but the underlying message was clear. They couldn't move forward, couldn't even begin to fix their mess, without me. They had excluded me from the strategy meeting, but they desperately needed me to salvage the fallout. They thought they were calling the shots. Now they were waiting for my permission to even start cleaning up their own disaster. The trap was set. The mice were scurrying, and I was simply waiting for them to walk right into it. The air in Conference Room A crackled with a palpable tension. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm, or in this case, a corporate reckoning. Vance sat at the head of the table, his usual peacock posture deflated, his expensive suit looking rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. Brenda Sterling, usually radiating an aura of manufactured confidence, was nervously fidgeting with her pearl necklace, her perfectly coiffed hair looking slightly askew. David Chen, the CFO, was pale, his eyes darting between his tablet and the grim faces around him. The usual corporate bravado was gone, replaced by a primal fear of the unknown. I walked in, not with a swagger, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew they held all the cards. My laptop bag felt heavier than usual, not with data, but with the weight of inevitable consequence. I took my seat at the table, not in the reserved VIP section, but in a neutral spot, a quiet observer who was about to dictate the terms. Vance cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Sarah, thank you for coming. We need to discuss this report of yours. His voice was raspy, stripped of its usual executive polish. This disruption. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Vance, it's not a disruption, it's data. Specifically, it's the data that should have informed your decisions before they were made. Protocol 7B requires a data analysis sign-off for all critical strategic proposals. This was bypassed. Brenda finally piped up, her voice a high-pitched whine. But, Sarah, we were under a tight deadline. We needed to move fast to capitalize on market trends. Your analysis showed potential issues, yes, but we assumed they were minor. Minor risks, I corrected, my tone even, can have major consequences. Global Innovations Incorporated has already flagged concerns about the projected rollout schedule, which is directly tied to the supply chain bottlenecks my report highlighted. David, I believe you've seen the projected Q4 revenue revisions, yes? The ones that indicate a significant shortfall based on current market realities, not wishful thinking? Chen visibly flinched, his gaze dropping to his tablet. He mumbled, "The projections are concerning." Vance slammed his hand on the table, a pathetic attempt at regaining control. This is all conjecture. Your report is based on assumptions, Sarah. We made strategic decisions based on market intelligence, not on hypothetical problems. This was it, the moment to reveal the true depth of the leverage. Hypothetical problems, I repeated calmly, opening my laptop. Let's talk about contracts, Mr. Vance. Specifically, the service level agreements. Global Innovations Incorporated's contract, for example, includes a penalty clause for delayed delivery of key components. A clause that stipulates a significant financial penalty for each week of delay, escalating after the first month. This penalty, compounded by the projected revenue shortfall from other market segments I flagged, isn't a hypothetical problem. It's a contractual obligation. And frankly, I paused, letting the words sink in. It's a hole that could swallow this company whole. I pulled up a digital copy of the Global Innovations Incorporated contract on my screen, projecting it for everyone to see. I scrolled directly to the penalty clause. The numbers were stark, unforgiving. Vance's face went from frustrated red to a ghastly white. Brenda's pearl necklace stopped its frantic dance. Furthermore, I continued, clicking to another document. Protocol 7B also includes a stipulation regarding compliance audits. It states that in the event of a strategic decision being made without proper data sign-off, and subsequently leading to demonstrable financial or legal repercussions, the data integrity lead has the authority to initiate a formal review and, if necessary, recommend the nullification of that decision. This review can also trigger an independent external audit of all decision-making processes that bypass compliance. The room fell silent. The implication was clear. If they tried to push forward with their flawed strategy, not only would they face the direct penalties, but an external audit could unearth a Pandora's box of other ignored compliance issues, potentially leading to regulatory fines and reputational ruin. Vance finally managed to stammer. Nullification? External audit? Sarah, you can't. This is corporate suicide. Corporate suicide, I agreed, was what you were already attempting by ignoring the data. I am merely presenting the consequences of that action. Now, we have two paths forward. Path A, the narrow escape hatch, if you will, and Path B, the full legal and financial implosion. I looked directly at Vance, my gaze unwavering. Option A. You acknowledge the critical role of data integrity and compliance. You agree to a public restructuring of key leadership roles, specifically involving the immediate resignation of those who spearheaded the decision to bypass Protocol 7B. This would include yourselves. I gestured to Vance, Brenda, and Chen. Secondly, a public apology and commitment to reinforcing data-driven decision-making across all levels, with significant budget reallocation to the Data Integrity Department, including my own. And of course, a substantial personal apology and a severance package for me, commensurate with the value I have provided and the distress caused by this. Oversight. I let that hang in the air, the implicit threat of a massive payout. Then I turned to Path B. Option B, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is the full legal and financial implosion. I formally initiate the external audit, as is my right under Protocol 7B. The Global Innovations Incorporated. Penalty clause is triggered. Potential breaches of other contractual obligations come to light. The SEC is notified of potential financial misrepresentation due to inflated projections. Your reputations and the company's are destroyed. You face personal liability for gross negligence. And I simply walk away, armed with the knowledge that I was right and you were wrong, and that I have enough documentation to ensure you never hold a position of corporate power again. I let the silence stretch. The choice was stark, brutal, and entirely of their own making. Vance stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Brenda looked like she was about to faint. Chen was already nervously typing something on his tablet, likely calculating the financial fallout of Option B. Finally, Vance spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Option A. We choose. Option A. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Excellent choice, Mr. Vance. A wise decision, given the circumstances. The aftermath was swift and brutal, but impeccably professional. By noon, an internal memo went out. It cited strategic leadership changes to better align with evolving market demands and a renewed commitment to data-driven decision-making. Vance, Brenda, and Chen were named as departing executives effective immediately, with full severance packages to be disclosed publicly. The memo also announced a temporary restructuring of the executive team, with Sarah Jenkins assuming interim oversight of strategic planning and data integrity initiatives. There was no mention of my role in their downfall, no public accusation. That wasn't my style. My victory was in the quiet, undeniable logic of Protocol 7B. The company would survive, perhaps even thrive, under a more competent leadership. The current executives, stripped of their positions and their reputations tarnished, would be left to contemplate their hubris. As for me, I didn't get a corner office with a view. I didn't get a fancy title that meant nothing. What I got was the satisfaction of knowing that competence, diligence, and a deep understanding of the rules, even the obscure ones, triumphs over arrogance and incompetence every single time. I had proven that the quiet ones, the ones who meticulously documented, who understood the system from the inside out, were the ones who held the real power. They had excluded me from the meeting. So I made sure they couldn't have a meeting, or a company, without me. I didn't forget to send the memo. I strategically delayed the sign-off on their flawed strategy until their own internal processes, their own forgotten protocols, became the instruments of their undoing. It was a perfectly executed corporate checkmate. And that, dear viewers, is how you ensure your voice is heard, even when they try to silence it. You don't shout. You simply ensure the system itself is designed to amplify your quiet, undeniable truth. If watching corporate hubris meet its logical, data-driven demise gets you energized, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales of quiet competence prevailing over arrogant incompetence. Because remember, the most devastating revenge is often the one delivered with a spreadsheet and a smile. They excluded me from the meeting. They paid the price. And that, my friends, is how you win.